Thank you so much, and it's so good to be here with all of you, and wonderful sessions already this morning, and I hope we will not disappoint you, because we have a group of great speakers that have joined us. You see their names above you. They are Tony Bedard, who is the CEO of Frontier Cooperative. We have Jessica Gordon-Limbhart, who is I'm sorry, I have to read your title, Professor of Community Justice and Social Economic Development. Forgive me, Jessica, a lot of words there.
It's okay.
And then we have Oscar Guzman, who is Chief of Party with WOCU, the World Council of Credit Unions. So we have a lot to learn from them, and we have designed the session so that we can also learn from all of you. We're going to mix it up a little bit in terms of format from the prior ones, because we have these great speakers, but also very limited time. So we designed the session with the intent of broadening understanding of the potential of cooperatives and the cooperative business model for inclusion of vulnerable and marginalized people, and through their inclusion, explore the potential for cooperatives to play an even greater role in broad-based development. And we are, through the fostering of appropriate policies and regulations for cooperatives to play a key role in a country's strategy to lessen inequality. And we're going to do this through mutual learning with our great speakers and with all of you. So we will, I'll be asking, as the other panels have, questions of each of them, and they will share their perspectives, but we also want to have questions from you. And rather than going with the mic at the end, we ask you, please, if you could use the app and put in, there's a Q&A session, and put that in, and some great help from OCDC, ICRG, and from NCBA. I will get those questions so that we can maximize the time and be able to respond to all of you. And we would love to hear from you, particularly about two things. Of course, anything else that you care to share, but your experience with cooperatives and inclusion of vulnerable groups, and also questions that you would like to have answered during the course of the session, questions that you have for our speakers here. So please share these on the app, and we will answer them after we have our initial dialogue with our speakers. We have a short time to cover a very complex subject, and my job right now is to set a common table for us before we look at the specific examples that our speakers will share, and picking up on the theme that Dr. Brown articulated earlier, help us to cultivate the potential. As was also in the introduction to this session, collaboration, partnerships will also be a theme throughout this. But first, the informal economy. What is it? You may have seen that term on the program here, and maybe lots of you know all about it. Others may, what in the world is that? And it's really basically economic activity outside the purview of government. And this exists certainly here in the United States and in the global North, just as it does within the global South. A key difference, however, is that of scale, with significantly greater numbers in the global South, people working within the informal economy. The large majority of informal workers, according to the IMF, are poor with no safety net, and many of them are also women. At the ICRG, a research and learning arm of the OCDC, we focus on the global South, low-income and emerging economies, and we work with cooperative stakeholders around the world to develop research-based objective evidence to support decision-making for cooperative-friendly policy and enabling environment that we heard about earlier, and through this evidence also to create actionable pathways for cooperatives in turn to optimize the economic and social benefits for their members. So when we say research, it's not some abstract thing. It's something that we work with partners to find pathways for operationalization of it. So what do we know, though, about co-ops that make us think that they can help to reduce the precariousness of the livelihoods of informal workers? In our research at the ICRG, others also, have shown that membership in a cooperative helps in many different measurable ways. And as you know, policymakers like numbers, they like data. And so we have that for them. And specifically, cooperatives foster both economic and social inclusion and strengthen agency of the members while strengthening their networks and social capital. In this study, what difference do cooperatives make? You see a reference to that on your tables. So if you're interested in going further, we'd love you to do so. We did a comprehensive evidence-based study in 4 countries, and it rigorously examined the impacts of cooperatives in the lives of their members in Kenya, Peru, Philippines, and Poland. So a diverse group of countries. And the evidence shows that members of cooperatives are more likely to enjoy better economic standing than the average person in those countries and are less likely to be poor or very poor. Co-ops help provide access to credit and other resources are among the many reasons that members said in our study as to why. In all 3 countries, found that women who belong to cooperatives, like men, also enjoy a higher standard of living. Here, women are more likely, again, to have access to credit than those who do not belong to cooperatives, but also access to, and there are many, many women who are in the global south who are perhaps not as well educated as their counterpart men and are excluded for various reasons. IMF estimates that there's something like 60% of the world adult workforce, including part-time gig workers, I suppose, but actually works in an informal economy. So we also participated in another study with Euromonitor International Consortium. And there we found that for women, particularly, the access to leadership opportunities, the access to, in addition to the advantages that a cooperative gives us inherently, really support and opportunities for training and upskilling really support women as they make a transition from the informal to the formal economy. So the Pathways study, this was the one we did with Euromonitor, found that cooperatives can help promote women's economic empowerment also by providing access to market credit and other resources and provide a platform for workers to organize themselves and gain access to formal markets. None of this is news to you, I know, but we have data that demonstrates that to policymakers that may, in the position of deciding about the scaling of cooperatives and the support. And these 2 studies provide a building block. Cooperatives do play an essential role in lessening inequality and promoting inclusive economic development, and the track record suggests that they can play an even larger role, cultivating the potential. And I myself have also found that cooperative model works in unanticipated places, times when inclusion is about more than economic fairness, in countries needing to reconcile after conflict, those seeking to recover after disasters, those transitioning from one form of government to another, such as happened in Eastern and Central Europe as they embraced democracy and moved into market economies. So, research shows what can be done, what is being done, and opens the doorway to the potential. Now, I think it would be great to explore how it can be done. And with that, I'm going to turn to our 3 speakers here, and I have questions, 2 questions, each of which I will ask each of them to answer in turn, and I myself will sit down and join the conversation. So the first one, however, and I will go from my left to my right. Jessica, how have you seen underserved or marginalized communities participate in cooperatives and cooperative development? And can you provide insight on the social inclusion in these cases?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everybody. So first I'll start with my research on African American cooperatives, and I've found in studying them throughout the last 3 centuries, I guess, similar to what you found with your case studies in those 3 countries, whereas we found that cooperatives provide access, right? Access where access isn't always available, provide additional recycling of resources in communities, provide women's leadership, opportunities for young people, opportunities for access to credit on much fairer terms, opportunities to either have land ownership or business ownership, that kind of thing. So lots of, well, let me give you some very specifics, and then I know everybody wants me to talk about the incarcerated worker co-ops I've been studying. So let me just quickly give one example from the Black community. At the turn of the 1900s, the turn of the 20th century, there was a rural supply co-op that was started in Virginia. And the interesting thing about that project is, the co-op, it lasted over 20 years, and the person who did the study on it was actually able to look at what happened in that community over those 20 years. So in addition to providing affordable supplies, a food co-op, farm supplies that hadn't been really available, especially not affordable to Blacks in that community, and a few jobs, they also were able to amass enough well-being from that shared purchasing to actually start to own their own farms. And within the 25 years of the co-op's existence, while the white population in that county actually went down and their standard of living went down, the Black population in that county actually increased and their standard of living increased. In addition, their political efficacy increased. By the time it was the 1950s in that area, and the whites were refusing to desegregate the schools, the Black community had already had such a history of solidarity that they were able to fight that, create their own schools, that kind of thing. So that's one quick example. I've been studying recently, I've been looking at sort of where are the most marginalized in the US these days and looking at incarcerated people. And the US does not have examples of this, but Puerto Rico, and you just heard about fantastic stuff happening in Puerto Rico. Well, also, before COVID, Puerto Rico had 4 or 5 incarcerated worker co-ops. What does that mean? That means incarcerated workers, while still in prison, were able to come together and form their own worker cooperatives, run their own businesses, get out of the slave labor side of the industry, and run their own businesses. So the first one, Cooperative Aragos, is an artist cooperative, mostly sculptures. They were the earliest one and were about 15 years running before COVID happened. And what they were able to do was, one, provide good wages, good return on the art, on the crafts that the members were creating. They also were able to give them a sense of purpose, mission, humanity, because they were running their own company, making their own decisions behind bars, where usually it's just the opposite, right? You can't make any decisions, you're being stripped of your humanity, that kind of thing. The other thing that's important in the Puerto Rican model is how much support they got from the League of Co-op and other co-ops in the Puerto Rican ecosystem, so that a lot of their customers were from other co-ops. They got supplies from co-ops as much as possible. They were taught how to do co-op development from other cooperators, et cetera. So that ecosystem was important. And the benefits really are social as well as economic. So they were able to support their own families, but they also were able to change their behavior I was able to interview guys who were out. Some of them, in fact, the first 5 presidents of that co-op had sentences 99 years and up, but were out within 15 years because their sentences got commuted because of their behavior change once they were a member of the co-op. And then recidivism rate was just tiny. The first 50 people that were out, only 2 recidivated, and 1 was out again after 6 months. Other countries, Ethiopia, I know I'm out of time. Ethiopia has a similar model. They also have some of their corrections officers trained as co-op developers, which is really turning corrections on its head. And they provide access to capital. They have a micro-lending branch of a micro-lender in the prison. And they also allow previously incarcerated to stay in their co-op. So live outside and come into the prison to work in their co-op during the day so they don't lose their employment when they get out.
Those are wonderful and compelling examples, Jessica. Thank you so much. And I love also that we have international and U.S. experience to compare, because we can all learn from each other. So Tony, could you pick up the baton and share some of your experiences?
Roughly 650,000 people come out of incarceration every year. And employers like ours, I run a herb, spice, and essential oil company, are always looking for workers. And in 2017, when unemployment was really low in Iowa, I was invited to go to a prison program. It happened to be one run at a federal prison in Omaha. And it's probably one of the most impactful days of my life. 50 guys that started it, 24 of them made it to the final, and 8, it was one of the most remarkable things. It was a Baylor University accredited course, as CEO of Your Life. It was kind of a Shark Tank deal. They put a business plan together, accounting. They made a presentation. The winner got like $500. And it was really impactful. And I went away from that day realizing there's a lot of human capital that's just plain untapped. So came back, hired a first person, and the gentleman was unbelievable. I mean, he was valedictorian of his class. He was a genius. He just found himself in prison, for 14 years of a 17-year sentence for carrying a gun to this 3rd robbery. And it's a very anonymous program at Frontier, but we've hired, through this, what we call breaking down barriers, we've hired, through the pandemic, we'd have never got through it. So we started to hire out that population, realized that we didn't know how to sort of assimilate all the kinds of, counseling, the kind of needs. So we partnered. We were already supporting the homeless shelter. And so we made the homeless shelter Willis Dady there in Cedar Rapids our temp agency. And so we hired, they screen previously incarcerated, homeless, also work with Catherine McCulley Center there in Cedar Rapids, Iowa area. It's a women's shelter, a refugee relocation. So we took this whole package of inclusivity, really used it. I mean, it's a great program in that it's I always believe that we have a stated purpose, doing good work. So it's all about, the idea we needed good help, but it was built on a business model and need. And so when temp agencies take the markup, they're able to do all the kinds of counseling that it takes. Then it was transportation. Well, how do you get from 15 miles from downtown Cedar Rapids out in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa? So we started transportation. We just built out this program to break down barriers through things like apprenticeships, English as a second language. We do a financial literacy. We have childcare. We've had childcare since 1976 when we started for $100 a week. So we even discount for people who can't afford that. So you can bring your kid on the bus. You can come to work. And we've probably hired, through the pandemic, we hired over 300 people through the apprenticeship program. About 70 or so have stayed with us. And some of it was just because of the scale and size of the pandemic and what it did to spices. And right now we probably have roughly 36 people who were previously incarcerated. Our goal is to be about 50% of our hired first line hiring. We've got great employees. It's totally anonymous. 2 people in HR know about it. I do orientations with everyone in the company, and I'm happy to say that people come in, they're accepted, and it's been a great program, and it's really honestly helped us. Again, we get way more out of it than we put into it. So, we're pretty a homogeneous group in rural Iowa, so it's really helped in terms of diversity of thought. It's been one of the honestly one of the best things. We have a long history in the supply chain world in developing and creating a better economic model, but this might be the most satisfying one. I've been there about 32 years, been doing this stuff a lot. This is probably the best thing we've done in my history there. So.
It's wonderful, inspiring story or telling of what has been done to inclusion, what it really means, but the different strategies that are needed to make that real. So I'm sure there'll be questions about the hows in both these cases, but let us move on, please, to Oscar, and if you can share some of your experiences.
Hi, good morning, everybody. As you know, almost 7 million Venezuelans left their country, the majority of them because of the lack of economic opportunities or seeking economic opportunities. Almost 2 million are in Peru and Ecuador, where we are implementing a USAID funded program. And we are giving them, or we developed this approach in order to give them opportunities, not only economic opportunities, but also the social integration. We are promoting that in the host countries. We have some components. The first one is livelihoods, of course, and we realized that it's entrepreneurship opportunities, employment opportunities, but we need to update our programs and methodologies because our cooperatives working over there, NGOs also that are offering these services, used to work in an in-person environment. We started in the middle of the pandemic, so now digital is one of our approaches, and we develop a lot of tools in order not only to increase the outreach of the people, especially young people, women, migrants that are in Peru and Ecuador, but also making more efficient the programs, because the more technology or digital you are, you need less fixed costs. So that makes this sustainable too. Training, virtual training, in person sometimes. Mentoring is one of the factors that is very important in this, and I saw one question in the app here. What is the role of the mentoring? It's very important because they accompany people during the process on the employment process or the entrepreneurship process. And so they're students of universities, professors of universities, but also other entrepreneurs or other professionals that are helping people. And this is turned out very interesting because there are Venezuelans helping Peruvians, Peruvians helping Venezuelans, Ecuadorians helping or supporting or mentoring Venezuelans, and Venezuelans mentoring Ecuadorians. So this really promotes not only economic opportunities, but social inclusion. Another part in entrepreneurship, which is very important, is to help them to develop very strong business plans. That is a weakness, and I believe as WOCU, this is one of our factors that we brought to the table, and this is that we see this from the financial perspective. So the business plans has to be, in order to be sustainable, has to include a market strategy, pretty strong market strategy, but also a financial strategy to make this sustainable. Also linking this with seed capital or credit, of course, but also market linkages. Because if you don't help entrepreneurs to sell their products with the strategies, with tools, with fairs, so they're not having the opportunity to increase their sales and make this sustainable too. On employment, we work with not only with the cooperatives, but also with the cooperatives federations and associations, because they realize that there is a turnover of their own staff in Peru and Ecuador, and they need people. And there are Venezuelans, thousands of Venezuelans, professionals with experience, with capacity, with the skills in order to join the cooperatives and the credit union federations or associations. So we started with them job platforms, for example, in order not only to bring together the demand and the supply of labor, but also to give training and mentoring to them too. And the third factor here for us, and the winner, is financial services. And we realized that it's not only credit. Credit is important, but we need savings, we need payments, we need insurance, we need remittances, because the people need all of this integral offer of financial services in order to level their cash flows, but also to be able to progress, even if you are a salaried person or even if you are in entrepreneurship. And one thing that is very important to link these livelihoods programs with financial services is financial education. But not a traditional financial education, but a practical, reflective financial education that we use as approaching WOCU, but also bringing the financial services with them, because if you only do the financial literacy, but you don't bring the financial services or link the financial services immediately, the habits are not going to change. And this is a culture. Savings, for example, is a matter of culture. It's not a matter of capacity. So if you don't bring the financial services with the financial literacy, you're not going to achieve that. But talking about financial services, important thing to do is to reduce barriers. Documentation is one of the first barriers for migrants and refugees in the host countries, right? In the case of Peru, they have 7 different IDs. So the financial institutions doesn't know how to serve or to open accounts or give other type of financial service to them. So that's the first barrier. The other thing is to train the financial institutions to adapt policies, procedures, because they don't have credit history. And you are not going to get the credit history from Venezuela Credit Bureau because that's outdated. And one thing was the credit history you have in Venezuela, but now you are in Peru or Ecuador. You are starting a new life. Credit history doesn't add anything to the risk or management of the risk, credit risk there. So we need to develop methodology, credit scoring models in order to be able to serve these people without credit history, for example. No guarantees, they don't have houses. So we need to develop or to update actually microcredit methodology in order to serve them. And also accompany them in the field. One thing is training the people of the credit unions or the financial cooperatives, but other thing is to accompany them to work with the segment, because it's a new segment, different culture, different way of thinking. So we need to be sure that all together comes in fairs, in meetings, in workshops, and meet together. So we bring the Venezuelans with financial literacy, we bring the financial services or the credit unions and cooperatives with an adequate offer of financial services. They meet together, they decide which cooperative has the better offer to me and which product or service do I need that moment. So this is the equation that we bring here. We also have a very important gender approach and youth approach here, because most of the migrants are women and are youth in Venezuelans in Ecuador and Peru. And also an important factor or a component of gender-based violence prevention and attention. And we thought at the beginning of the project, what's the role of financial services? What's the role of entrepreneurship employment programs with gender-based violence attention and prevention? And we realized at the end that it's everything. If you don't have livelihoods, you don't have financial education, if you don't have financial services, then the survivor of gender-based violence are not going to leave the circle of violence. So yes, they need psychological attention, legal attention, shelter, food, but if they don't have this equation, they are not going to leave the circle of violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oscar, for those insights. And I think as we think about the examples that have been given, people who are vulnerable, marginalized, as the jargon goes, as people who have been in some way displaced from their society and their community. And the cooperative brings an inclusive approach, including them in practical ways, the economic skills and entree into a better economic standard is key. We find from our research, this is a little catchphrase maybe you all can remember, as we do, that in the study I cited earlier, that people join, seems universally for economic reasons, but one of the main reasons they stay is for the social benefits, meaning the network that they have, the relationships that they cultivate, and that the co-op is there to support them in times of need, usually. So I really thank you for sharing those insights. We do have a second question for all of you, and that has to do with, and you've touched on it maybe in a little ways in each of your comments, but what are your experiences with the challenges and of doing this? Because we can talk about it, and it sounds easy. Yeah, cooperatives are inclusive. Bring them all in. That's fine. But what are the challenges? How have you coped with those? And what is the opportunity, or shall we say, picking up on the theme, what is the potential that we can cultivate from your own experience and learning? I guess we'll go back through the same order, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, so obviously there are many challenges, but luckily most of them are able to be overcome. I would say the first one is, how do we get cooperative economics education, business education to people who are the most excluded, right? Sometimes there's an issue because most excluded people don't necessarily don't think of alternatives first, right? They want a piece of the pie, right? So they, so if you even try to talk about alternatives, some people will reject it because of that. But then when you're able to actually get them to see what it means and how they already practice solidarity, and this is just another step in that way, then they can embrace it. But getting that education to them, getting it in the right way, in the right format, is really important. In terms of the incarcerated workers, also getting education to the corrections agencies and to the officers, right? Because they also, most of their attitude is just lock them up, punish them, whatever. They're not thinking about ways to do empowerment or correction. But once they get educated about the co-op model and learn again about the potentials, they also get interested. And I've seen a couple places where they're also thinking about corrections officers being in worker co-ops of their own, and what a difference that could make. So that's the education part. The next part is the memorandum of agreement, the operating, right, workable agreements with corrections. It's really hard to get them. Again, they don't really respect the people they're working with, but also it's hard because you're asking them to change how they work. So figuring out ways and enabling laws also help to make the workable agreements more workable. So places that have better enabling laws for how to do co-ops in those kind of settings, and then make it easier for each institution to then have workable agreements. So getting those enabling laws, co-op ecosystem support is actually a benefit as well as a challenge. Some places the co-ops are not as supportive, especially again for incarcerated workers, right? The assumption is they're bad people, they did bad things, we just keep them locked up. So getting past those negative attitudes in order to get the ecosystem support is really important. And changing behavior also of the incarcerated workers themselves, right? A lot of them also, it takes a while for them to understand how the model can be a benefit. What are the opportunities? Obviously the same kinds of things, right? Opportunities to create co-op ecosystem support, and we see where we have co-op ecosystem support, we have stronger programs, stronger activities. Connecting with the credit union stuff, I've seen studies where giving incarcerated people a credit union account makes a huge difference in just their ability to navigate while inside, but also once they come out. The cafe co-op in Puerto Rico, that was a incarcerated worker co-op operating right outside the gates of the prison. They talked about how having their business account at one of the local credit unions made such a big difference because the credit union understood co-ops, for one, was supportive, but also they had Puerto Rican law saying that co-ops are supposed to control their own finances and that kind of thing. They were able to use that law to say that they should be able to write their own checks. Normally in prison you can't handle the money and that kind of stuff, but they were able to use the enabling co-op laws that Puerto Rico had to force the corrections officers. They said, we're incorporated as a co-op under Puerto Rican law. This is what the law says we're supposed to do. You need to give us that access.
Great. Thank you so much. Tony, with all of the examples that you gave, what are the challenges and how did you meet them?
Ours, for us, it always comes down, or for me, it comes down to sort of the economic driver. We're fortunate enough to have a business that, needs workers, but really we cut our teeth on trying to grow the organic industry and spices for Simply Organic and our line of Spices and Frontier. And so we have, the whole 7 principles. Our cooperative members very much have a concern for the community. Also, they're patient in our projects so that, they know that in order for us to grow, we have to create this different supply chain. And so over the years, I've got a great example of a Guatemalan-based cooperative that's called Fedecavera. They bring cardamom, turmeric, and allspice to us. They have roughly 42 co-ops that fold under them, 30,000 Mayan families that grow for it. Over the years, we just started to partner. We were not going to get enough organic cardamom. Honestly, India was using too much turmeric. And when I say too much, they're keeping it in their country, and the middle class is growing. So we created a project there. So we work with them to make them more vibrant. In the early days, it was some simple tools. In 2015, we put in a brick and mortar dental clinic that complemented the medical they had. I went there last year. We've got 2 projects going. We're very big in our supply chain doing things like community building and business building. So in the community, last year we launched a mobile dental and medical clinic that can go out into the different farmers' communities. We've also got a great big project with USAID to do pasteurization, grinding, processing. All of this, I tell you all this because it's the economic engine. That's why I think I can give you dozens and dozens of projects around the world we've done that way, but it's driven by the fact that there's a need. If we open up our eyes to, the kind of places the developing world where we get our products, we can drive the livelihoods up there. We can have a better, more vibrant supply chain. And it's really that kind of, the cooperative model has allowed us to do that. Many of them, like I say, Fedecavera is a co-op. Around the world, there's many co-ops. Farmers are organized like that, living on a couple of hectares of land. Next week, I go to Madagascar. The prices are crashing. How are we going to support these farmers? We're already doing financial literacy. We talked about that. It's important that they understand to save for a rainy day. We're doing biodiversity, drive regen. We're trying to create value-added work there because if we don't, and this goes for all parts of the business, if we don't think about sort of the stability and economic viability of our ideas, like hiring people, right? We need good people. We need good suppliers. It's a short-term approach. And these farmers will not be there a decade from now. They have the same issues here in the United States with farming. It's more prevalent in the developing world. So it's that kind of look. So I have more positives than negatives. Our early days when we were tiny, capital was a problem. The cooperative model kind of got in the way. But if you do well, anybody's going to give you money if you're doing okay, right? So our cooperative's fine. And so, it's just been a cornerstone for our success is just be more inclusive all the way down to the micro farmer halfway around the world.
It's a wonderful, wonderful message for us all. Thank you, Tony. And Oscar?
Well, many challenges for migrants and refugees, but I will emphasize 2. And per nature, cooperatives are open membership, right? So we are open to everybody. We are the inclusive institutions. But sometimes we don't apply that. Afraid, risk, lack of opportunities. And it's important to see that it's not only the social impact or responsibility that we have with this kind of population, but there are opportunities over there, right? We talk with the credit unions about the having 70% of the migrants and refugees already having a job or a business. 70% needs to save or have a debit card in order to make payments or to collect as income as you are entrepreneur, or insurance products, 30% credit, and credit is $2,000 in average for 1 year. So the risk is low, it's minimal. So there are opportunities. It's a balance between social and economic viability, I will say, for the credit unions. But also the challenge is to work with them, give them technical assistance in order to be able to adjust all the products, processes, procedures, implement tools in order to serve this new community. And now we see that we work with 10 financial cooperatives or credit unions in both countries, and now we see banks, financial institutions, microfinance institutions, and cajas municipales approaching us to see, we are seeing this as an opportunity. And now that the credit unions or financial cooperatives open the vision of the opportunity, then they will serve for sure other migrants and refugees, because we as the pilot serve 110,000, but there are still millions of people that needs access to financial services. The other one is, I will say, another cooperative principle is cooperation. And we can't do this alone. We have more than 60 different partners and allies in both countries. And we need all of you. Some of you are or are experts in entrepreneurship, other employment, other gender, youth, financial services. We need to work all together because this is an ecosystem and we are not the experts in everything. So we need to strengthen our relations, our partnerships here in order to generate more impact. Also to dilute costs, because it's not the same that you as an expert on financial services do it, that I'm coming without or from outside of the financial services industry to learn how to do it still, to give technical assistance. We are going to be having more time and efficiencies over there. So a partnership will have a win-win for all of us as a cooperative movement, but also for the people, the excluded people that are needing opportunities, economic opportunities to get social integration. That's the goal for all of us. That's the target, and that's the invitation for all of us.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Those of you sitting out there might not be able to see this clock that I'm looking at, which is counting us down. I don't know whether we're going to lift off or what, but it means that we have little time for the questions. There were, as Oscar mentioned, some questions that came in through the app. Some of you may have seen those. And I think that our speakers have really touched on some of those. So I'm just going to turn a little bit because they seem, particularly there was one that had quite a few people that wanted to know about, they've had challenges with inclusion and they wanted to know tip or trick was the wording in the question. So is there like a 1-2 word phrase or something that any of you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but might share with the audience about how you approach or how you stimulate, maybe you have resistance or whatever with those challenges that you mentioned?
I just offer that, I think Oscar said a little bit of that. We're not the experts in all these things. I mean, when I first started hiring from previous incarcerated, I'm like, let's get going, chop, chop, how hard could this be, And one of them is transportation, like they couldn't get there. And one of them is they got there and our lockers are too small because we're hiring people from the homeless population. They come in and say, where are they supposed to put their stuff? It's that. So I realized very early I needed the social services involved that really knew how to counsel. That's why we had the homeless shelter become our temp services. So whether it's that or it's partners with USAID, when we're trying to build these bigger programs out, you just can't. We tried so hard in the early days in our supply chain to do it ourselves. And I'm sure that we would not have been successful had we not used, even in our hiring practices, experts that helped us. So mine is like, I always think you can do everything yourself, and I realize half the time I can't. So, it's time to get other people who know what they're doing. So bringing the right people into the conversation with the right hearts and the right minds.
And I think you also touched on something from my perspective that is very important, is sometimes it's the things that seem like little things, the practical considerations, the transportation or other things that are going on in people's lives. And that's what's good about, one of the many things that's good about cooperative model, that there is room to understand that. There is not simply, well, can you pay your loan or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yes, Jessica.
Yeah, I would say the shorthand is that people most impacted need to have a say, right? Need to have the power to say and to be involved, and so we have to listen, right? I said this actually at several years ago now at an impact conference. Diversity and inclusion are actually not enough. We need equity and justice. And so we need to be thinking it's not just enough to have people at the table, it's not even enough to include them. In some way we have to get even further, and that's where making sure the voices, the most impacted people, we hear them, they get a say, they're the ones in charge. That was why I really loved when I learned about the Puerto Rican incarcerated worker. That's the only model that I found so far where the incarcerated worker themselves really were the ones who instigated the co-ops, run their own co-ops with support and help, but as opposed to the help model where other people are creating the co-ops for them.
Our screen has turned red, so Oscar, do you have a tip or a trick? I don't want to neglect to get your input here.
Yes, to complement, I will say in the previous panel I heard the common values or the same values, right? That means that is very important, but also look for partners with the willingness and capacity to do things, because the sum of capacities with a common objective and willingness to do it will do the job.
Great. Well, thank you all, and I will just say, that it seems to me one of the really important things that we've been talking about is for people to feel, to be included, but that they feel that they have, and you were talking about that, Jessica, some control over their own destiny. I think that's something that we all share, and that's something also that can be built on as you seek to have more inclusion within the cooperatives that you work with or belong to. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And we're going to break for lunch now. Our lunch buffet is set up right next door in the Holman Lounge, and you'll see beverages out in the hallway. You'll bring your lunch back here into the ballroom, and then we'll kick off at 12:30 with a session on telling your co-op story to policymakers with Leah Ned, NCBA's head of government relations. But there's a moment that I want Doug to come up, and he's going to give a little warning.
Okay, I'm going to give a warning. Many of you probably have picked up in the news this morning that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, is going to do a test national alert this afternoon. Yes, at 2:20. And it will happen on any phone that's turned on in the United States, sometime between 2:20 and 2:50. It doesn't, I mean, remember this used to happen every once in a while. So here's the plan. We will, as expeditiously as possible, we have box lunch today, so that's quick. Come back in, and we'll start the advocacy programming as soon as possible. We're going to try and start the rest of the agenda, the afternoon agenda, at 1:35 instead of 1:45, and that's going to basically get us to a place where we can do a break when all this happens. I'll remind folks of this in a little bit, but I kind of wanted to get ahead. I'm guessing people are going to be talking about, what are they going to do? This warning's coming. And then those who are in the international track at that time, they're going to have specific guidance on how they're going to handle that moment in time. So please, expeditiously, go grab your box lunch, come on back, and great morning. Thank you.